J-Lo, ya tú sabes, no hay más nada.
It's a new generation
Mr. Worldwide,
of party people.
get on the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are back and better than ever. It is a new generation of party people, as the wordsmith J-Lo just said, because the party is all about mathematics, baby. We are on part 3 of solving quadratic equations by using factoring and by using the quadratic formula, and today we are talking about said quadratic formula. And we use the quadratic formula generally when we are unable to factor a quadratic, because usually that's the easiest way to solve a quadratic is by factoring. Now, the quadratic formula will work on any quadratic. We can always use it. It is our go-to method to solve a quadratic equation if we get stuck. So I'm sure you've seen it before. If we are in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0, this is very important right here. It must be equal to 0. Then we can use the quadratic formula here to find the values of x which make the equation true. In other words, we replace x with whatever we find and simplify, and we should get 0. There she is, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, example. Solve the equation x squared minus 5x minus 14 equals 0 by using the quadratic formula. Well, I'm going to cheat because you should always check very quickly, can I factor it? Because that, boys and girls, is the quickest way. The quadratic formula is excellent, but it can take a little while. So let's see if we can factor it first. So we need, let's see, factors of negative 14 that when combined give us negative 5. So let's see. Negative 1 times 14 gives me negative 14, but the sum is, this is a times, is positive 13. And if I switch that 1 times negative 14, that gives me negative 13. You know, once you check these, if you don't get the absolute value of the number, you should just move on. What about 2 multiplied by negative 7? Well, that gives me negative 14, and the sum gives me negative 5. Bazinga, we are good. So that means we can factor this into x plus 2, the plus 2 coming from right there, multiplied by x minus 7, right there, equal to 0. And then by the null factor law, we say x plus 2 equals 0. Subtract 2 minus 2, and we get x equals negative 2. Or x minus 7 could equal 0. We add 7, and we get x equal to 7. Yippee-ki-yay. All right. So that's smooth and easy. But just to show you the quadratic formula will also solve it, and also to show you that it's quicker to factor than to use the quadratic formula, let's go ahead and solve it using the quadratic formula. Now the first thing you need to do is find out what a, b, and c are. Well, a and b are the coefficients of the x squared term and the x term respectively, and then c is the coefficient. So for this problem, the a term is the coefficient of x squared, which is a 1. Okay, it's not written because we don't write it, it's just understood that it's a 1. So a equals 1. B is going to be equal to negative 5 right here, negative 5. And then c is equal to the constant, which is negative 14. And let's just pretend if there was nothing at all there, then c would be equal to 0. But there is something there, it's negative 14. So we can say that x equals negative b. So negative, I'm going to replace b with negative 5. Plus or minus, this is where we get our two solutions from, because we're going to add and subtract the square root of b squared, so that's negative 5 squared. Make sure you put parentheses around the negative, because when you square, otherwise you're going to think that you're going to have a negative result, which is not the case. It's always going to be positive here. plus or minus, no, not plus or minus, what's the matter with you, Becker? B squared minus 4AC, so that's 4 times 1 times negative 14. I was hoping not to have to extend the square root, but there we go. Okay, let's put a line there so we don't get confused. All over 2 times A is 1, so that's 2 times 1. Now it's just a matter of simplifying. X equals, let's see, negative, negative, so that's going to be positive 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared is 25. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 14 is plus, let's see, 56. Good. All over 2 times 1 is 2. All right. So x will equal 5 plus or minus the square root. 25 plus 56 is 81 over 2. So x will equal 5 plus or minus square root of 81 is 9 over 2. And we'll move up here. And so this is where we get our two solutions, because x equals 5 plus 9 over 2, or x equals 5 minus 9 over 2. And so this would turn into 14 over 2, which is equal to 7. Pow! Same thing we got here. And then this would be equal to 5 minus 9 is negative 4 over 2, which simplifies to negative 2. Kapow! We get that right here. So you can see that the quadratic formula will solve this quadratic just like we can by factoring. But it takes a whole heck of a lot longer. So if you can factor, you should factor. But of course, there are times when you can't factor. And this is going to be one of those examples, but we'll check it to be sure. Now, you always have to have your quadratic equal to 0. So for this one, I'm going to have to add 1 to both sides to get rid of the minus 1 on this side. And this turns out to be 4x squared minus 8x plus 1 equals 0. So here is our quadratic. So let's first try and factor it, and since the coefficient here is not 1, I'm going to try and split the middle term. That's my preferred method. So 4 times 1 is 4, so I need factors of 4 that when combined give me negative 8. Okay, so let's see, 4 times 1 is 4, and if I add those I get 5. Doesn't work. And let's see, negative 4 times negative 1 gives me a positive 4. When combined gives me a negative 5. What about 2 and 2? 2 times 2 is 4. Their sum is 4. And so if I do the negative, it'll just be negative 4. So none of them are negative 8, which means that this guy is not factorable. Can't be factored. Not factorable. And this is the big time, this is the best use for the quadratic formula. Okay, so we need to figure out what A, B, and C equal. A is the coefficient of the squared term, so it's going to be 4. B is the coefficient of the x term, it's going to be negative 8. And C is the constant, which in this case is positive 1. So here we go. Just use our formula, x equals negative b, so that would be negative 8. Okay, I'm replacing the b. The negative is always going to be there, so make sure you use parentheses when you need to. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So again, parentheses here, don't forget those. Negative 8 squared minus 4 times a is 4 times c is 1, all over 2a, so that's 2 times 4. So x will equal a negative 8 is a positive 8, excuse me, plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 16 over 2 times 4 is 8. And so x will equal 8 plus or minus 64 minus 16 is going to be 48. So square root 48 over 8. And that is a perfectly good answer. I would accept it. But there are times when you do need to simplify it. And you always have to look at the square root, see if that can be simplified, which this one can, if you recall that we can rewrite 48 as 16 times 3. And there's a lot of ways you could rewrite it, but 16 is the greatest perfect square that I can use. So this becomes 8 plus or minus square root of 16 is 4. So that's 4 root 3 over 8. Yes? And then we're going to simplify, we could simplify this as 8 over 8 plus or minus 4 root 3 over 8. Yes? And then this compels to be a 1. 8 over 8 is 1. And this becomes 1 and this becomes 2. So the simplified form would be 1 plus or minus root 3, square root of 3 over 2. But like I said, this answer right here is perfectly fine. There just might be times where you need to simplify it. Alright, that is it for now. There is going to be a part 4, and then we'll be done with this section. We will see you next time. Becker is out!